Right, you guys are going to be writing an analysis paragraph today. It's different than the description paragraph that you guys wrote last week. Remember, there's 4 steps, 4 paragraphs. For art criticism, we have description, analysis, interpretation, and judgment. So I gave you guys some prompts for the analysis to help guide you through how you are actually supposed to analyze artwork. So we're going to be focusing on our principles and elements, and I have it several times in here for you guys to use the reference sheet. So it is required. I gave you guys those sheets as helpful hints last week. This week, it is required that you guys use words from those sheets. So the first thing that I want you guys to talk about is your texture in your piece. So if you go, well, what am I supposed to talk about? So if you go to this reference sheet, we go to our elements, I find texture, and I'm going to look at those words and see if any of those can help me describe this piece right here. So most of this clay surface right here is smooth. So when I start my analysis, I can say the surface of the space is mostly smooth. There are dents, because dent is another word that we can use, dented. It doesn't appear bumpy on the surface, but there are carved pieces that appear to create dents on the surface. Okay, so I'm talking about the texture there. Media is what we use to create our artwork. So media, medium, if you hear that, this is mixed media because we're using clay, we're using paint, and we're using other objects. So I can say the texture of the raffia is different than the texture of the surface of the face, which brings us to our next principle, which we're looking at contrast. So I want you to use a reference sheet to talk about contrast, and it gives really good examples over here, large versus small. So contrast is putting something that is different next to each other. So when we're looking at contrast, is it sharp versus dull? Do we have a simple area versus a complex area? So I can talk about my texture and say that there's a big contrast in the surface of the face compared to the mixed media in the raffia. There's contrast in the lines that are carved in versus the top flat surface. There's contrast in color. We're using a little bit brighter of a red over here versus the darker brown that covers the face. And so you're looking at what is different in the piece. Why would the artist choose to use a bright color versus a dull color? Okay, so we're just identifying where we see contrast there. I want you guys to talk about color, which I've already done when we're talking about bright versus dull. But if you guys need to use that reference, we look over here at color and we're describing, oh, there's the word right there, bright and dull. So you guys can use these words, again, to help you describe the principles and elements. I also want you guys talking about pattern and repetition. So when we look over here, if I'm looking at pattern and repetition, okay, so I'm looking over here and I see that these circles are repeated. So that's going to create that pattern. It's a reoccurrence of circles. So if you're not sure how to say, yeah, it's a circle over and over and over, okay, use the word reoccurrence. So you guys can look at the words over here. Again, to help you, I am repeating myself a lot just to make sure that you guys understand my expectations for this. Last thing you're going to talk about is shape. So we talked about organic versus geometric. You guys can look at the mask and you guys can talk about that because at this point we should understand what organic is. If you want to pick a particular area, we can talk about how these carved lines are almost straight on the side, but they are slightly angular because they go outward. You can talk about how a majority of the mask is organic, but there are some straight lines, sharp corners that create geometric accents on the top and the bottom. So it's pretty easy if you guys use these sheets to talk about the principles and elements instead of just going in blind. So you guys need 5 to 8 sentences, but you do need to include all of those prompts. So if you can't include all of the prompts right here in 5 sentences, you need to write more. So you're using the principles and elements reference sheet to talk about texture, color, contrast, pattern and repetition, and shapes, and you are required to include all of those. And I will put those in bold when you guys are working on this so you guys can see it a little bit better.